Welcome once again to Cyberwatch with the usual suspects. It's time to take your phone calls at 844-790-TALK, 844-790-8255. Once again, you have your hosts with you. We have Vlad, we have Andrew Strutt, and of course I'm Scott Miller, and we're ready to talk everything cyber. So, Vlad, why don't you give us the first story since you were on assignment last week?
An assignment in the deep web.
So the first story we're going to talk about is the court striking down decision that forced quad owners or drone owners to register their drones. Essentially, what happened was that the court ruled that there was a law that was passed by Congress that prohibited FAA from being able to force any kind of registration onto, or any kind of control really, over model aircraft. And the drones and quads fall within the definition of model aircraft. So it appears that in the meantime, the bad news is you're out of $5. And if you've already registered your drone, your name is still in the database, still publicly accessible. But if you've been stalling and waiting for this court decision, then you no longer have to register.
What does that do for the laws about like not being able to fly in fire zones and things like that?
Those laws are still in effect. So essentially, no-fly zones are still no-fly zones. You still have to follow the NOTAMs. You still can't fly over New York City. You still can't fly over Washington, D.C. But you don't need to put your name into a publicly accessible database if you're paranoid. And you no longer have to spend $5 to register something that FAA has no authority to regulate over.
Yeah, for me, it's cheap over paranoid.
Well, and this is long-established laws that had been in place for hobbyists, radio control, line control hobbyists that have been doing this for, well over 50 years. Since World War II, there was the hobby. And so what's interesting to note is that not only was it struck down, but it was found to be completely illegal. Not that it was too much money or it wasn't right or something. It was actually found to be illegal by the courts. So it's an interesting fact I like to note.
All right. I have one more question on this because I'm not a drone person, so I have very limited use in that. But this applies only to hobbyist drones. It doesn't apply to things like Amazon delivering things by drone.
Absolutely. So like it doesn't change any of the normal laws in effect. If you're going to be doing anything commercially to make money, if it's over certain weights or size and so on, geographical limitations, all that stuff still applies. So it doesn't really change anything in that regard.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's an excellent point. So if you're doing something for commercial purposes, you still need to be registered. You may need to have certain pilot certifications, depending on the weight and use and the type of airspace. And also, if you're flying FPV, you still need to have your FCC license and have your ham radio call sign embedded in the video. So all those laws still apply. Actually, to round out, for me, it was actually a matter of privacy, not the $5.
Right. Right. And the first-person view usually broadcasts on 5.8 gigahertz, which is an actual amateur radio frequency, which is very easy to use. But just like Vlad said, you have to do it legally with your call sign and be a licensed ham operator. Not a lot of FPV pilots do that, but they really should to respect the frequencies and to maintain the peace that we have on amateur bands.
Okay. All right, I've got the next story. I'm going to stay with court cases since that seems to be a theme right now. And that is Verizon and Apple are lobbying against right-to-repair laws. A handful of states are pursuing so-called right-to-repair laws, which would make it easier for consumers to repair their own products and find replacement parts. The proposals were spearheaded in part by, I love this, angry John Deere tractor owners who say the company's draconian restrictions placed on what owners can do with their tractors has made the cost of doing business significantly more expensive. The rules are backed by third-party repair shops, and they're opposed, of course, by phone makers like Apple and game console makers like Sony and Microsoft, who really have monopolized repair. There's one bill up in New York on these, and let's see if I've got other states listed. No, New York is the only one they talk about in the story. I really like things like this because the third-party repairs often can be cheaper, and it also loosens up the hold on what phone makers can make you do with your phone And so I'm happy to see these. I hope these pass, and I hope they get one here in Nevada.
Now I have a question.
Yeah.
There was a Supreme Court ruling that came out today. It was actually a lawsuit filed by a certain printer and printer ink manufacturer.
Yes.
And is this in any way related to that court case?
No, it isn't, and it's funny you should mention that. Let's talk about that court case now, and then we'll come back and relate the two. So, as you mentioned, it was Lexmark, which is the printer maker, and I forget the Impressions, I think was the name of the ink company. And what it was is that Impressions would refill Lexmark printer containers and resell them. And they would often refill them more than once and resell them. And Lexmark claimed that their intellectual property was being violated by Impressions refilling the ink. In this case, I was really surprised because I thought for sure the pro-business court, in so many intellectual property cases, and now with the recent appointment, even more conservative pro-business court, I thought for sure that they were going to side with Lexmark on this. And they didn't. It was an 8-0 decision, except for a certain portion, which was 7-1. And as always, it comes down to it was not intellectual property that they were saying you couldn't violate. It was because they made a patent claim. And because basically the Supreme Court said that patents don't survive the sale. Once you sell it, you've given up your patent right, and someone can do whatever they want with the item. The reason that doesn't apply to this is more has to do with licensing. When all those things you click through when you get your phone, and with the intellectual property they have that's not sold. So those are the two, and I hope that makes it a little clearer why the two are different, that you need a law for one and the other one the Supreme Court just took care of.
Interesting.
That makes sense. So my reading of the law is one of the reasons that the small company won is specifically because Lexmark sold the printer cartridges internationally, and they had no authority to enforce their copyright claims once that sale happened internationally. I thought that was a key part of this decision.
Yeah, and that's the only part that had a dissent.
Exactly.
A dissenting opinion on the actual
by a liberal on the court. We'll talk more about this after the break. All right, you're back with the usual suspects, and of course we'll take your calls at 1-844-790-TALK, 1-844-790-8255. And we were just finishing up talking about some legal cases. We were talking about the case with the printer cartridges that Lexmark just lost, and we were just finishing up, and we were talking about part of the case resolved around when they've sold the stuff overseas. And that was the one dissent, is that one of the justices said that overseas they had the right to do anything they wanted because American patent law didn't really apply directly overseas. So they left them an opening that they can still, force people to get real Lexmark cartridges.
So let me jump on the tail of this, because this is what I have a problem with, is that it's stifling innovation, it's stifling business. And here's another prime example of it. And where because of that, because of litigation and laws, and not that I'm against them, but Chinese version of Amazon is already using drones to deliver stuff to customers. In 2013, Amazon CEO for Jeff Bezos for Amazon announced on 60 Minutes that they were going to demonstrate their company's newest innovation to be able to deliver products within 30 minutes of an order. They're trying to get market into China, but they're like 3 years at least. They're quoted as saying at least take a few more years to be able to get approval from the FAA regulations to have a commercial drone use. Where in China they're already to market. They already have a product that works. They're already delivering products via this. So it's another symptom of how we're stifling innovation here. That's just going to push more business internationally. Oh, we can't sell printer cartridges or recycle printer cartridges in the United States? We'll do it internationally.
Yeah, well, I think you're going to see, little rise in printer prices because, manufacturers, that's been their model is make the printer real cheap and then make it up on the cartridges.
Right.
And so, when you don't buy authentic cartridges, that model goes out the window. But the other thing is that I realize there is something to the stifling innovation argument with regulation, but sometimes it's like, but I don't want drones falling out of the sky. I really want regulations first, before a drone lands on my head. And so I'm not sure that the Chinese rushing into offering drone sales is the best example of stifling innovation, because obviously Amazon came up with the idea here first.
Well, here's the thing. It's like
there.
I'm into radio control and I'm also into drones and all this stuff. Do I fly my stuff safe because the federal government tells me to? No, I do it because it's the right thing to do. And businesses do it. They'll do it because they don't want to have their drones crashing and giving themselves a bad name. We don't do these things. We don't do good business just because the federal government tells us to. So yes, I see
we'll
what
have
you're
to
saying.
have another show on this because I totally disagree.
I think that's a number of issues. So first of all, you mentioned the court ruling that you're surprised it was did not side with large business. I actually see this as a great sign. I see this as a pro-innovation ruling.
Do you? Okay.
Now, as far as Chinese drone deliveries, Chinese airspace is significantly less congested than U.S. airspace. We have a large number of privately owned aircraft. We have a large number of small airports all over the place, not just international airports, but small regional airports. In many cases, without even a control tower, you just fly around, you key up the radio, you turn on the lights, and you land. We have ultralights, we have all sorts of things up in the air. Private helicopters that you may not see in China.
Oh, you're absolutely right, and that's the thing that they're doing in China. First off, is fixed routes between warehouses out in rural villages and to local contractors to deliver large capacity drones and so on, but mostly to take food to rural farms, to urban warehouses and so on. So that's where they're extending it. And you're absolutely right, and that's a perfect valid point. Is that we do have a lot of general aviation plus hobbyist aviation. The only busy places in China are going to be like Beijing and the large cities and so on. So very valid points, Vlad.
All right.
The other one is, of course, the number of skeet shooters.
It's been known to happen.
All right. Andrew, what's your next story?
Let's see. If we wanted to shift gears for a little bit,
Yes.
An interesting thing and a follow-up to the it wasn't the malware that was doing it or the ransomware that was doing it, but with the leaks that we talked about in one of our first shows. Shadow Brokers has come back saying that they want to put a price on monthly zero-day leaks. So basically they want to do an auction every month so that people will pay them not to leak their latest stuff that they've stolen. So it's an interesting
kind of a subscription model for malware.
For leaks, for 0 days, which is vulnerabilities, for exploits to the 0 days, and so on. So, Vlad, what's your take on some of this?
He's stunned.
Yeah, you brought up a lot of points. So first of all, it's essentially stolen government secrets, and those that work with the government obviously don't want stolen government secrets to be released or auctioned off to our adversaries. I do think it's very interesting. I mean, if you're interested in this field, you obviously want to know what all the cool new tech that you have not seen is and what some of the classified things may be.
Right. So interesting. I did see a statistic, and I was kind of encouraged by the poll, and it was in a large Facebook group with like 50,000 users. A couple hundred people participated in it, and they're just general technology people, hacker people, infosec people. And the winning poll was that and the question asked if we should pay for the leaks or pay for the and either do research with it or so on. And most people voted that they don't do business with terrorists. They don't negotiate with terrorists, and I was encouraged by that.
I don't encouraging.
Yeah, I don't think we should pay it. Because it's only obviously it's anti-American, it's anti against our intelligence community. This is obviously an operation that's just continued on through, for my opinion, from WikiLeaks and so on. So I think it's all part of all the same gameplay.
Now, one argument that really bothered me and really annoyed me since the previous release is people are trying to use this as a case study against government stockpiling exploits and so-called cyber weapons.
Right.
And they were actually calling for U.S. government to no longer do that. And it's a really funny argument because you don't see them calling any other countries to stop doing it. And you're certainly not going to see Russia or China or any other potential adversary stopping to stockpile exploits. If anything, it's going to encourage them to continue doing it and to ramp up their efforts because they're going to see how advanced our efforts are.
Right. And absolutely right. And I would look at the background and the motives behind the people who are calling for those studies, because that's exactly it. It's just bad press, bad viewpoints against America's interests and America's ability to protect itself in the cyber realm. So everyone's saying bad America because we use the tools of the trade. It doesn't make any sense to me.
That we discussed part of this a little bit last week about whether the government should stockpile 0 days.
Right.
And actually, the first week we were on the show, and we kind of came to the conclusion that you can't unilaterally disarm in this environment.
No.
And
no, it's like asking
it's a good idea. Yeah.
It's like asking the police not to carry weapons and expecting the criminals to do the same, just on a gentleman's handshake. Like, it's okay. We're all going to play friendly now. Now we will. Never mind the last 60, 70 years of Cold War and proxy wars and so on with the communists, the Chinese and Russians and so on. So never mind all that.
That's the thing is post-Cold War now intelligence gathering has to become a profit center to maintain its place in government.
Yeah, and I've heard that before from people giving lectures at the International Spy Museum here in Washington, D.C. It's an interesting viewpoint.
All right. Vlad, what story do you have for us?
You know what? Why don't we go on with one of Andrew's next stories, actually?
Okay. So continuing on with the same stuff with vulnerabilities and whatnot, these aren't necessarily O days that are being marketed and sold to the highest bidder and so on, but these are two very interesting vulnerabilities. One of them is a Linux vulnerability for the utility called sudo, which is for super user do, like to do something as a root user or an administrator. It's a tool that's used everywhere, and the vulnerability is pretty amazing. So it's extra important that if you run a Linux machine, be sure to update your sudo. The other thing that tells into that is there's another vulnerability that got patched today, which is for FreeRadius, which is an open source implementation of a 26-year-old Radius networking protocol. Now, Radius is used for authentication. So back in the days when you dial up to the internet with dial-up and a PPP connection with a modem, you were actually doing a Radius authentication once you got connected. Radius is also used for things like PPPoE for DSL and other things that require authentication. So what's interesting is that this vulnerability has been around for a very long time, and only now recently patching it. So it's kind of interesting. It's a big deal, I think, from coming from an ISP background, but it's getting fixed. Those are the two. Go ahead.
Now, do you think that there's an exploit that will be released shortly, possibly by shadow brokers, or do you see any coincidence in the timing for this patch being released?
That's a good question, Vlad. I think it's kind of a coincidence, but I wouldn't be surprised. And I was asking this earlier out on the ethers, is that I wonder if there has been any exploits for this FreeRadius vulnerability. Because if you had that type, you could bypass authentication for anything that's using FreeRadius, which is pretty wide. Dial-up accounts, VPN maybe, DSL, PPP over Ethernet connections. I mean, all kinds of things use Radius authentication. And so I would be interested to know if there's actually exploits in the wild that have been being used all this time. So that's a good question. I think it's a coincidence, but I could be wrong. I think it's a coincidence. So.
All right, and that'll be the last word before we take over these commercial messages. Welcome back to Cyberwatch with the usual suspects. Right now, I'd like to thank our underwriter, Spirent Federal Systems, maker of CyberFlood. CyberFlood from Spirent is the world's highest performing Layer 4 through 7 testing solution. Built with development teams in mind, CyberFlood has an easy-to-use interface that allows users to choose from a library of tens of thousands of realistic applications, and attack vectors, including fuzzing, malware, and DDoS for unparalleled realism and scalability. It is capable of generating real traffic from anywhere in the world, allowing you to test your content-aware network applications. Visit SpirentFederal.com or call 801-785-1448 to speak to a Spirent Federal Systems representative today to learn more about how Cyberflood can help manage and improve the integrity of your network. All right, and we'd also like to take your calls at 844-790-TALK, 844-790-8255. And Rodent, you had one more story for us. Andrew?
Well, I'm a big fan of Tesla, and I'm a big fan of SpaceX and Elon Musk. He's a great guy, and he's got some great tech that's coming out of his stuff. But I am, as a driver, an avid driver, car owner, whatnot, I'm resistant to the whole autopilot stuff. Like, I want to be in control of my vehicle. I don't mind assistance, and I don't mind creature comforts to make that drive easier and safer and so on. But the Tesla autopilot review is pretty bad. So it's quite dangerous. So, I mean, you'd need a whole layer of training and awareness to be able to use it safely. So I'm not sure if we're ready yet, especially with this particular vehicle. And I'm in line to buy one. So it's not like I'm just bad-mouthing Tesla because I don't like the whole thing. No, I'm into the whole thing. But we got to get there first. And I'm sure Vlad has some thoughts on this. But one of the interesting statistics that came out is that the autopilot classified only 30% of other cars accurately and 1% of bicyclists. And this is why he starts out, or Heather Knight actually starts out in her blog post saying that the Tesla autopilot review, quote, "bikers will die." So she goes on and talks about the different things that happen and so on, how it works, and some of the bugs and tweaks that have been known for a very long time. Vlad and I have mutual friends that have a vehicle that we know we get to see some of the stuff and tweaks that he has on it and some of the interesting things that are cool and bad about it. Yes, it is very neat. So to the geek and to the high-tech gadget guy who likes cars, it's the perfect car. But otherwise, it has an F on a self-locking feature that you can lock yourself out of the car, and the only way you can get back into it is with someone on the internet. So if you don't have cell phone range and you can't get to the app, you're locked out of your car and you're basically screwed. So there's a couple other things. It has this giant, beautiful touch screen, but the user interface is like ridiculously horrible. It took 5 screens for them to navigate to turn off the vehicle from inside the car. Now, it does have a fancy feature that if you get out of the vehicle and walk away, the car automatically turns off. But it doesn't tell you. It doesn't give you any confirmation or whatnot. It just happens with magic. So the user experience in the giant touchscreen needs to be fixed. They did give us some great positive feedback about the situational awareness display that gave an A+. But they also say and highlight never use the Tesla around bicyclists because it has a couple other bugs that are pretty bad. Automatic lane switching is really cool, but it doesn't see motorcycles. It doesn't see some other stuff. So with that being said, there's a lot of cool technology that's coming out there, but it's not quite ready yet. And Tesla has a lot more work to do with that. They don't talk anything about the electrical vehicle, the range, and the capabilities of that. But other than that, they're just talking about the autopilot of the vehicle. So back to you guys.
All right. I am waiting a long time before I worry about an autopilot vehicle. I'm going to get like second or third generation. I'm not going to be part of the beta test first generation.
Right. Like
So,
hybrid cars, they've been out
now
for.
we're in second generation of essentially autopilot or automation. It's only once we get to level 4, level 5, that you can essentially really trust the car, that you no longer will need the steering wheel. You'll no longer actually need a front-facing seat. But right now you're in the dangerous medium where the car can do enough to give you a false sense of security, but not enough to actually really keep you safe. So I would argue that right now you're in the most dangerous revision of the autopilot system.
Right.
Well, I'm going to wait it out, and a control freak like me will probably never give up a steering wheel. And
Oh, you're going to be like the guy who walks into a dealership today asking for the manual transmission and manual windows.
Right.
that's right, because it means it's one less thing that can break on the car.
Yeah, right. It won't break. You know how expensive those fancy electric windows are to replace? Ask my grandpa, he'll tell you.
Oh, just opening up the door to get to them, and then just the controller in the door that the switch is actually actuated starts out at around $100.
Yeah.
Oh, don't get me started. I wanted to replace. I wanted to replace the reservoir for windshield wiper fluid on my car because it had a leak. It turns out in the Mercedes that the windshield wiper reservoir comes with a heater on the bottom. So this is a $250 part.
Yes. Absolutely. Well, because the Germans drive in actual real weather. So,
yeah.
Not like California and Nevada weather where the things don't freeze up all the time. So
I know. I love my Mercedes, but it's been full of surprises.
Right.
And
I do have one more story that's about legal stuff, and
okay.
So we can get on that. We're talking about radio and some other stuff, but it's a quick one. FCC issues amateur radio licensee a notice of violation for pirate radio broadcasting. How about that? So a notice of violation, they haven't assigned a penalty or anything like that. It's just basically saying, hey, we've confirmed that it's really you doing it, and you need to answer us within 20 days in writing, responding to the notice of violation, fully explaining any violations, and providing all relevant surrounding facts and circumstances. So basically what they did is they went out and they tracked them down due to probably complaints for people that might be using 93.7 megahertz FM broadcast. And so with field strength measurements revealed that the signal transmitted by the station greatly exceeds 250 picovolts, which I'd have to figure out how many watts that is he was transmitting, but it's well over the established limits at 3 meters and a maximum permitted power under Part 15 rules. And he's also amateur radio license holder, so he should know what the laws are and that what he was doing. So it's an interesting thing. When the FCC does crack down on stuff, they crack down pretty hard. So I thought that was interesting to note, being that we're in the business. Yeah.
Well, I'm continuing on the legal thing. I guess I'm channeling my inner lawyer today. I don't know.
Is that what it is? Okay.
I don't know what it is. But this one is more humorous than what the legal point really is. But Google, accused of underpaying women, says it's too expensive to get wage data. Google argued that it was too financially burdensome and logistically challenging to compile and hand over salary records that the government has requested. That just struck me as so funny that the data company that makes, that all it does is amass and massage data, can't put a little teaspoon in the stream of all their data and pull out the wage data they need, and that they're really good with everyone else's data, but apparently their data is not as well organized as they have for the rest of the world. What do you guys think?
Wow. I'll go with Vlad first.
I want to go back to the comment in the story that Andrew mentioned. So when you started talking about the FCC violation, I thought you were going to bring up the story about several gentlemen in the Bronx that were broadcasting on the police frequency.
Yes.
I actually did not see this most current ruling, so that would be interesting to read up on.
Yes, that actually got past notice of violation, and they fined him.
Yes, they fined him. He had, I think, 90 days to respond, and I believe he said he was going to respond and try to get the fine reduced.
Right, and it was because it was $15,000 solid, like no negotiation.
Which is low as far as some of the FCC fines go.
You think so?
The gentleman who was broadcasting and hitting some of the U.S. Navy satellites, I believe his fine was $250,000. The guy who was based in North Jersey.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, back to Scott's story.
Yeah. I got to ask, talking about the guy in New Jersey, what could you be thinking when you hit a Navy satellite? It's like, how can you – what goes through your mind? What's the scenario you come up with and going, this ends well for me?
I think some people have this mistaken impression that those satellites are not utilized adequately, that they're not monitored adequately, and they greatly underestimate the U.S. government's ability to track them down. Right. I mean, they're hitting a bird that costs taxpayers not millions, but possibly billions of dollars between launch and maintenance.
Sure.
Yeah, and personnel and upkeep, maintenance, absolutely, and it affects national security. This is equipment that we use to keep us safe, and they're messing with it.
Oh yeah, the reason that that bird accepts unencrypted communication is so that people in the field who may need to use that bird in emergency can use basically any radio available to them and don't have to worry about being able to swap ciphers or synchronizing to a particular day. It's so they can get a hold of somebody in an emergency, and they were utilizing that bird.
Wow.
Okay. Why don't we take our break early and then we'll come back and talk about Google's problem.
Okay, and if anyone wants to call in, 844-790-TALK. And you can also get us on Internet Relay Chat, and you can also get us at our website, usualsuspects.today.
And we're back, and you can call in at 844-790-TALK, 844-790-8255. So, guys, tell me why Google should not just be laughed out of court that they can't get, that it's too expensive for them to gather data.
I actually think they should be forced to gather data. They're one of the largest data aggregators in the world, if not the largest.
Right.
So I think it's pretty laughable for them to make that argument.
Yeah.
Very laughable. And it's not even that they have to gather it. They already have it all. It's just a matter of parsing it and searching through it all to yield out some information that they want. You know, they have it all. We're already giving it all to them.
I think they have it. They may have seen it, and they may not want to disclose in open court.
I think that's probably accurate, Vlad.
Now, and here's the other thing. It's relative to what you think is expensive, which for Google I think is ridiculous. Google officials testified in federal court that it would have to spend up to 500 hours of work and $100,000 to comply with the investigators' ongoing demand for wage data. That's like a drop in the bucket.
Right. like a 16th of one of their many hundreds of business units would spend that in any normal day on just regular stuff, just at a whim. Oh, let's try to dev something and see if it works. Oh, no, that didn't work. Whatever.
So I just pulled this up online. Google's annual income last year was just about $28 billion.
Wow.
So.
Okay, so I'm all about Team America, and with all the crazy stuff that's going on in the world, this just popped out on the news. U.S. successfully intercepts ICBM in historic test. So the U.S. military shoots down a simulated ballistic missile amid all the North Korean threats and so on. So it's interesting. I think that we're starting to show off some of our tech to show the world that not only can we defend ourselves, but also defend our allies.
That's good news. They've been working on that since, the Strategic Defense Initiative in the 80s, so
right.
80s and 90s.
Right. And then if anyone's going to try to
from the Star Wars program, right?
Right.
Right. It was called the Star Wars program, and then Steven Spielberg complained to the government that they shouldn't keep referring to the program as Star Wars. So they referred to it by its official congressional name, the Strategic Defense Initiative.
Yeah, but it doesn't sound as cool.
No. How are you supposed to fund something like that? Like that's not cool. So I haven't read any of the specifics on it. It just came out on the wire from ABC and BBC as of like a couple minutes ago. So I'll have to read more up on it. But I think that's pretty important.
Yeah.
I do know that we've been working on it for a long time. But I also believe that there's some aspect to it where they delay some of these tests and delay some of these demonstrations until we absolutely have to show the world that, hey, we're not falling behind on this. We're not letting North Korea make these threats and not going to sit there and stand by. Like I had no problem with us moving that missile defense system to South Korea. Everyone complained about that, but no one wants to put North Korea in check. And we definitely don't want to escalate the war that's still there. We don't have a peace treaty. We have a truce, ceasefire, but we don't want to get that war going again. But we also can't just idly stand by with North Korea threatening everyone with missiles. Of course, we're going to put a missile defense system around them.
Yeah.
So, anyways.
So
all right, now
there's necessarily too much information that's available about the test or that will be available. They've had a number of tests over the years. And, of course, the critical component is detecting the launch.
Right.
And while we're talking about North Korea now, the real threat is not just North Korea. I mean, we have to be looking at other parts of the world. We have to look at Russia and the way they've been behaving past several years.
Absolutely, absolutely. With them annexing Crimea, they have large missile systems.
Attacking Ukraine.
Attacking the Ukraine, they shot down that commercial airliner.
A foreign commercial airliner full of doctors flying to the AIDS conference. Yeah.
Civilians, yeah, 100%. So, yeah, I thought that was interesting. I think it's good to show that America is doing these. We have the tech, we have the means, and we use it appropriately. It's one thing I point out too. When you look at a lot of the conflicts in the world and civil wars and whatnot, look at all the weapons that they're using. They're AK-47s. They're not AR-15s. So, anyways.
All right, I'm going to give you whiplash now. We're going to go completely off of legal. We're going to go off of bad news for, and interesting news there. We're going to go to Don't Live Under a Rock. And I want to remind everybody that NASA has a really interesting announcement that they made today, and that is that they've sent a probe, and it'll be the first one to, quote, touch the sun, and expected to do it on Wednesday. NASA officials are scheduled to make an announcement regarding the agency's first ever mission to fly directly into the punishing heat of the sun's atmosphere. The Solar Probe Plus mission is scheduled to launch in the summer of 2018 and will orbit within 4 million miles of the sun's surface, where the probe will face heat and radiation unlike any spacecraft. It's actually flying much closer than Mercury is. And they expect it to, let's see, what is the exact distance?
Are they going to fly it in and burn it up to get
they're going to fly it within 4 million miles of the sun's surface. And the surface is in quotes.
Really close.
Considering that Mercury is 28 million miles away. Well, 28 to 43, depending on.
So do they think it'll burn up, or do they think it'll survive and give us readings as it dips down in that orbit?
I'm reading from space.com, and it doesn't say whether they expect it to burn up, but tomorrow there's going to be a webcast about it, and you can watch it on NASA TV or on space.com, and they'll give you complete coverage of the probe. But I wanted to remind everyone that raw research is important, and here's an example of NASA doing it. So keep that NASA budget flying.
Absolutely.
All right. Who's got the last story for today, or second to last?
I got another one, but since Vlad was on special assignment into the dark web last week, you got anything, Vlad, or I'll go?
Yeah, so let's talk about something that's going to impact lots of business travelers. Looks like the Department of Homeland Security will prohibit any laptops or large electronics larger than a phone in an airplane cabin for those flying into the United States. There's been a lot of discussion about this rule, whether it's actually going to go into effect or not. But this is going to impact a lot of business travelers, a lot of recreational travelers, because essentially means you're going to be trapped in a cabin, forced to either watch the meager selection of movies on the screen or pay for a slightly better selection of movies. And be unable to do any work that typically does get done on long flights.
So they are passing this. This is definitely happening.
Well, there are conflicting things coming out, because there was an announcement from today that they wouldn't be banning them on flights from Europe. Then the head of Homeland Security said they were banning them on all countries.
So definitely, possibly, maybe.
Yeah. So, I expect there's going to be a ban. How widespread it is they still haven't figured out. I don't think they figured out, which is why we can't get a straight answer out of it, because this administration tends to announce things before they've really thought it all the way through sometimes. And I think this is an example. If all laptops have to go into checked baggage, you're going to see something of a revolt about baggage checking fees that people have been avoiding by carrying their laptops on. Just from a real practical sense like that. But the other thing is, what about professionals traveling? You really don't want to let your hard disk kind of out of your sight.
Right. No,
And,
this changes a lot of things for the road warriors, especially traveling through not so friendly countries. Absolutely, you don't ever want to lose eyesight or hands-on that important equipment. So if this does go into effect and going to be permanent, there'll be a lot of ways that things change, either to fight against it or get it changed, or to like start removing hard drives or relying more on the cloud. I mean, there's several different scenarios there.
Yeah, I know a number, and Vlad and you can certainly speak more to this than me because I'm just a domestic guy when it comes to work. But I know a lot of international security consultants are relying more on the cloud so that they don't have to deal with having their hard drives inspected at the border wherever they are, or deal with the fact that tools on their hard drives may not be legal in every jurisdiction that they travel to.
So some certainly do, depending on what their expertise is. I mean, I can usually get by with a completely clean laptop that I can procure in the source country and a bootable Kali Linux image for a lot of my work on site. Now, it's once I'm done with the project and I'm flying it back and I have to somehow exfiltrate the data for the report, that's when it gets really interesting. Right. And that's when micro SD cards and how the quotas come into play.
Right. I'm not saying I've had to smuggle electronics, but I'm saying that sometimes you have to do that. Yeah. For example, I carry a lot of memory cards, a lot of USB keys and stuff like that. And I don't want to lose control of them. I want them to stay where I put them. But some of those are discreetly stuffed in pockets that generally you would not find. So not unless you empty the bag and x-rayed it and you still saw stuff in there, then you kept digging and digging, you'd find them and pull them out. So I had that happen in Dubai once where I was flying through, and I'd been through there numerous times, and they finally one day found my lock-picking sets. And I was really surprised by it, and then they really made a big fuss about it. And mostly not that I had them, but that they didn't want me to leave with them. And so I even showed them my visa exemption memo and my ISAF credentials and whatnot, showing them that I'm okay to travel with this stuff and that I cannot be impeded, through customs, etc. And they wouldn't let me keep it. So I ended up having to let a lockpick set go when I was going through Dubai for similar reasons.
Okay, I've got one more story. This is taken from techdirt.com, so I'd refer everyone to their site to read more detail here. And then it's along the lines of things we've discussed before, and that is, of course, internet net neutrality good, no net neutrality bad. And this is from an FCC quote, "A sensible question is why civilized governments do not seek to deprive terrorists of unfettered access to the internet. Sadly, here in America, limiting access to the internet would be illegal under the euphemistic term net neutrality." This is from a former FCC commissioner, trying to justify getting rid of net neutrality based on fighting terrorism.
Right.
And I know we only have a few seconds left, but your thoughts?
Boy, it's you can't even crush that in. We'll have to talk about net neutrality next week for sure.
Let's start
There's too much
with that story.
Yes.
Thank you all for listening.
All right, and next week we'll be back to take your calls. And thank you again for joining Cyberwatch with the usual suspects.